Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess let me ask you, like, how different are the stag films of back in the day compared to I mean, pornography. You could find absolutely anything you ever want to find pornography wise today. But like, I guess how different were they back then? Was it just more like girls dancing, or was it
Well,
softcore?
it's the whole, had the whole segue was you had the soft stuff, which basically was nudie stuff and, simulated stuff. But then, most of the loops were hardcore. And what is unique about them is they do some really fucking strange ass shit that, not that it's like illegal or anything, but you can never get away with it today. I mean, there's one of a fucking Yeti walking around with a skull cock, you know, that type of shit. There's one with Batman and Robin, and at the end, you're convinced that these two are going to go down on each other. Uh, I had one with the lone. I had a lot of stuff I couldn't do because we just hit that snag where nobody was buying the shit, and I had to like just get rid of some of the loops. But that I had three series called Extreme Sleaze Showcase, which really went pretty well because that was all the B and D and the S&M stuff,
Yeah.
but all the weird shit, midgets, transsexuals, whatever. So it was like the whole thing was so Wild West that they could, basically get away with anything. The only thing was like anybody else, don't fucking show me anything with fucking kids in it because I'll put you in the fucking emergency room.
Yeah.
And luckily, I've never come across any of that shit. But you ran the gauntlet with the animals, the fucking horses and the pigs and shit, which of course we couldn't do anything with that either. But
Yeah, yeah. No one
that's
wants
the
to
whole,
watch
the
that.
whole weirdness of it. And then you see people pop up in it, like the chick Lucy Grantham from Last House on the Left was in one of the loops I had
Really?
with Sean Costello. So it just was different. And this was like a proving ground for a lot of cameramen. Like Carter Stevens started with some of this stuff. He was actually in a few loops. Of course, Jamie Gillis, Sean Costello, and a lot of these guys, became, porn directors. So it's just interesting from that point of view that, you could get away with a lot more then. And it was like, it was raw. And the whole thing was what people don't fucking get was you had guys like Arbola, Dave Ruby, Gillis to a certain extent. These guys just like the average fucking guy.
Yeah.
And in being that way, the guy watching the porn film had that faint hope that, he's just as average as these guys. He has that faint chance of getting laid. Now you've got guys with 14-inch cocks, huge fucking balls, all jacked up and shit. Like, hey, that ain't fucking competition. We lost.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't know. When did that start? When Stallone was doing porn? What did he do? The party at Kitty and Studs.
Yeah, that was all softcore shit that basically got him out of getting drafted, that type of thing. But that, the weird part was that's what got Frank Zappa out of getting drafted too. That he did a fucking loop or something, and somebody fucking found it, and that got him. He couldn't get drafted.
Really? So why
Yeah,
wouldn't that get him drafted?
he got arrested.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So,
he got busted for it.
wow.
I
So
remember. I remember reading it in one of his biographies that they, just did something to do quick money, and they got fucking caught. So
wow. I don't even
yeah,
think. I really don't think being arrested would get you out of a draft if they did it nowadays. That's for
no,
sure.
no, no, that would probably be a prerequisite. Not knocking anybody. Just the way there was a whole thing. When okay, I don't know how they work this, but you've seen it in fucking juvenile delinquent movies that they always said you can go to jail or join the army, that type of shit.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe that existed in a certain period of time, maybe in the 50s or something like that. But I don't know now because, okay, what he did was basically a sex crime, so they wouldn't want him. That type of thing.
Man, crazy how that is actually considered a sex crime because, I mean, I don't know. I come from an era when, pretty much 1 out of 5 girls I know has an OnlyFans account. So it's like, I mean,
Yeah.
like sex work, if you want to call it that, whether it's, solo stuff or not. I mean, sex work has become so prevalent that I mean, particularly after after COVID and the economy, I mean, basically crashed. So many people I know who have actually gone into that kind of work to make ends meet, and honestly, it was one of their first choices to do it too. So it's just become a lot more prevalent and a lot more accepted.
Well, back then it was like, the thing was, and like I've met a lot of these people. I mean, I consider like Annette Hines, Jeannie Silver, Debbie Evans, Vanessa, and a couple other people. We're friendly with each other. We've done panels and stuff like that. And we keep in touch. And it was like, you know, they needed a certain modicum of acting ability to make this, give it the socially redeeming value. The funny part about that, if you look at all Nick Phillips films, most of them all have downbeat endings, suicide, deaths, all kinds of other weird shit. They were all playing, we had to have the socially redeeming value to get it out. And then for whatever reason, it just sort of like let loose in the 80s with the A. We're just getting away with everything short of fucking snuff films,
Yeah. Well, I think
Crazy.
that was. You think that was more just because of the switch of format into VHS, because it just made owning things a lot more easier. You didn't need a big projector. You didn't need a screen. All you needed was a VHS player or a Betamax player if that was the format you
Well,
chose.
we're talking early 80s, and what happened was there was a big fucking shift in, like, okay, we had all this stuff out. You had Hot Chicks, you had this, you had that. You had a certain amount of, a couple B&D films out there, but then all of a sudden, this whole Avon thing started, the Avon chain, where they were like, the Avon 7, the Avon 42nd, these small theaters and shit. And what happened was they were gauging, what people were reacting to. So they decided to create films catered to these like really fucked up, B&D, S&M, torture type scenarios.
Okay.
And they, one of them was, Carter Stevens directed Wicked Schoolgirls and a couple other ones, but it was with the premise that he would direct a separate B&D scene, to make this work at a certain place.
Right.
So the story I heard was that they had this guy, Phil Prince, who said he could do it cheaper. And he came up with some of the most fucking twisted shit. This was the stuff the Meese Commission used as the most vile and horrible, example of mob-influenced pornography.
Yeah.
So, there's a whole myth to that whole thing that writer Bill Landis put out, where basically everything he said was sadly untrue about it because people had dug things up. And Phil Prince, nobody knew what happened. According to what Landis wrote, he was doing life in prison for a murder of an associate in front of the Bryant Theater. But that wasn't the case. He, got in a fucking stupid ass robbery where he shot a fucking ice cream clerk, and him and his buddy were all fucked up, and it was like a Keystone cops chase all over Manhattan. And he went away for a while. Then when he got out, he went up to New England and became a truck driver and got in an accident and broke his back, and he was in a wheelchair for a good many years. But he just did an interview for the Rialto Report where he debunks everything that was said. And he goes, look, I did this stuff. And he goes, I was doing a lot of coke and, things like that. And he goes, but as far as what this guy wrote, he goes, it isn't fucking true. None of it's true. He goes, I didn't kill anybody. I don't know where any of this stuff's coming from. And it's like, the weird part was, this guy badmouthed people like Jamie Gillis, Carter Stevens, a bunch of Joel Reed, other people. I met all these people, and the whole thing was they were flabbergasted that this guy Landis opinion of them when they basically never had anything to do with him. So I know he's held up as like the poster child of the 80s, sort of, as a writer with that Sleazoid Express thing and stuff like that.
Right.
But the bottom line was the guy was a huge fucking drug abuser, and nobody lies more than a fucking junkie. I hate to say it, but be that as it may, unfortunately, a lot of this shit, that he had said was debunked as lies, and it sort of sucks because I sort of read a lot of the stuff that the guy wrote, and I saw like glaring inconsistencies, but he had a sharp eye for what was going on in the area. He had a remarkable memory as far as how these theaters looked inside and out.
Yeah.
Where I don't, because I was always fucking drunk, and I admit it, So. I mean, I looked at a marquee. Okay, that's cool. I'm going in here. I never took wind of the decor. I just actually wanted to know where the restroom was in case I really had to piss. So
Yeah. So let me ask
But,
you.
yeah.
I know one of the myths that kind of goes around is that like a lot of these like independent films of that era or the grindhouse exploitation pictures, there's always myths that like it was financed by the mob with I guess money laundering intent. But is there any myth to that where the mob actually making certain kinds of grindhouse movies?
Yeah, the porn. They controlled the porn. The other thing was that the people that did Deep Throat, that released Deep Throat, I'm going to say I'm going to pronounce the last name wrong. Perino, I think the Perino brothers. They started Bryanston Pictures, which released the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a bunch of Andy Milligan's films, The Human Factor, and things like that. And they released them basically on the premises they thought they were going to fucking lose money, but they didn't. So they never paid anybody. That was their big thing, because they had told Gerard Damiano, who did Deep Throat and the Devil and Miss Jones, when he wanted more money, they were going to break his knees. So, that was the rough end of it. These guys controlled it, and basically most of the porn, in New York was made by the mob, and it was like a low key thing. And Sharon Mitchell had said during our Q&A that she goes, they treated us well. They treated us like queens. We were well paid. I mean, they owned all that stuff over there. It was all, when the guy who invented the Peep Show started his own thing and they found out it worked, he found all his machines out on the street, and then he had to cut a deal with the mob. But in cutting the deal, he opened himself up to more money because he could branch out in different cities and things.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like they always said, as long as everybody's making money, everybody's happy. It's when they're not making money or everybody's unhappy. I mean, the one guy who controlled the whole thing was a guy named, I think it was Robert DiBernardo. They called him DB. And he wasn't a maid, he was, that was his thing. But basically, he didn't have a crew. There wasn't, a whole whatever. I'm sure he had something going on with liquidators, because I know he was in there once.
Mm-hmm.
He was a low-key guy who just, was a good businessman. Unfortunately, John Gotti or it was an unauthorized hit or something that took him out, which really shouldn't have happened. It was over a $25,000 debt that was owed to him, and got fucking stupid. But that was sort of the downfall of the whole thing with infighting and shit like that.
Yeah. That was towards the end of the
The funny part was the guy who started it, Papa of the Peeps, Marty Hodis. They had another guy named Bobby Soretsky, and there was a whole big deal with 3 people with a murder for hire deal. There's a book called Times Square, if you can find it anywhere, which pretty much documents that whole thing. But the weird thing was Soretsky owned all these mini bookstores, like they were like wedged in between other stores and shit. And I can remember going over there, like, when I was in high school and shit, we were looking for real porn. You really couldn't get it at that point. But if you hinted that you had some money, they'd take you in the back room. So this guy sidles up to me, and I'm like the spokesman for the group, and he goes, "What? I'm looking for something little." Oh yeah, come with me. And he's got his arm around me, and he's bringing me in the back room, but at the same time, he's patting me down to see if I got a gun or a badge or something.
Right.
So you go in there, and of course, this shit's jacked up like 7 times the cover price, but it's hardcore, so we bought it. And then I had the epiphany about a year and a half ago that was Bobby Soretsky, because I saw a picture of him in some newspaper thing. I'm like, motherfucker, that's the guy that fucking brought me in the back room. So, you run in, it's just odd how many different people I've run into over the years. My philosophy was, you never know who you're sitting next to drinking with.
Yeah.
I was sitting there, something happened one night, and I had to go outside and straighten something out, and I go back in, I'm all pissed off, and this guy sitting next to me goes, that was pretty good. I like the way you handled that. I'm like, okay, let me buy you a drink. Okay. So the guy leaves, and I'm like, okay, what was that all about? And then the guy that was with him, I knew, and he sidles over, and he goes, hey, he liked what you did. And I go, not for nothing. Who is this guy? And he told me he's a fucking professional hitman. He said, if what just happened to you happened to him, he goes, that guy'd be found 3 days later, face down in the swamps. So I'm like, okay. But I just had like the weird, even working at Liquidators, and that's a notorious place. But, I was sitting in there one day, and this guy used to come in, he looked like, he knew what he was doing. His name was Mike Black. Yeah, right. And we're sitting there bullshitting, and he goes, something, that Giuliani's got to go. And I'm like, yeah, I know, he sucks. And he goes, no, he's got to go big time. We're going to make him go. And he's basically telling me they're going to put out a hit on Giuliani. And I'm like, okay, I don't fucking know anything. Then 2 weeks later, 9/11 happened.
Wow.
So, yeah. But it's like, like I said, I don't know what it is. I must be easy to talk to or something like that. But just like some of the weirdest shit happens, especially with Liquidators. Mel Brooks came in there one day.
Really?
And I was standing by the counter. I turn around, I go, you're, and he goes, oh, shh. He goes, I want a copy of that movie in the window, Gung Ho. Could you get it for me, please? I'm like, yes, sir. Here you go. Thank you. That was it. Didn't want to be noticed. I ran into Ox Baker selling shit on the corner and made the mistake of letting him know where I worked. And he used to come in and haunt me all the time.
Yeah.